In this episode, we talk about how camping, glamping, and luxury outdoor hospitality can open up more sustainable choices for the consumer to allow them to travel in a conscious and sustainable way, allowing us to have low impact adventures that don't cost the earth. Welcome to episode 64. Glamping and unique holiday rentals are surging in popularity with the growing desire of customers to book holidays that deliver an experience. They are also the new business of choice for those wanting to improve their work-life balance. So how do you build a strong business like this that gives you the life you need and a great investment? I'm Sarah Riley, and I want to share what I've discovered after being immersed in this industry for over 20 years to inspire you to find out more about what's going on. Welcome, this is the business of glamping and unique holiday rentals. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining me today. It's wonderful to have you here as my guest. So, for the listeners, would you mind sharing a bit of background information about you, where you've come from, why you are now here talking to me today about sustainability issues?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to connect again, in fact. My name is Willy Legrand. I'm a professor at the IU International University of Applied Sciences, that's located in Germany. And I have a specialization in sustainable hospitality development and management. Where do I come from and why do I do this? So I was born in France, in the mountains close to Geneva, from a farming family. My parents had a little farm, and we produced milk, and we transformed the milk into a cheese, a blue cheese, which was one of the first organically certified cheese in France, for blue cheese in any case. But my parents immigrated to Canada in the 70s. I followed, I was a little boy, and they purchased a farm. So I grew up on a farm. And now, in hindsight, after all those years, I think this time on the farm has shaped a little bit my thinking and my views around our interaction with nature. You're on the farm, we follow the weather pattern to do all the tasks we have to do on the farm. And I think that really has shaped a little bit my view on our interaction with nature. Growing up, I ended up studying geography in Winnipeg, actually in the center of Canada. I graduated with a degree, a bachelor degree, and I wasn't too sure what to do. And I moved out actually to the West Coast, to Vancouver Island. And it was the 1990s. There was a lot of tourism. There still is a lot of tourism going on, a lot of hotels. And I've always been fascinated by this. And I thought there's a nice little connection between nature and hospitality. It's just an extension, if you will. We produce food, and then it's being prepared and served eventually. And it's one long line, one chain. And so I was curious, and I ended up a bit by luck, really, to start working in hotels on the West Coast, and I really enjoyed it. But I also quickly found out that there are lots of problems, in fact, with hospitality, and I ended up going to study a master's with a specialization in corporate environmental management. I then went on to do a PhD eventually, but I had a foot for many years in the hospitality sector, and as I said, there were a lot of issues that I thought we could do better in the hospitality world. I moved to academia about a little bit more than 20 years ago now. And one of my goals was I wanted to make some changes in hospitality. And I knew that having my own little hotel would not quite cut it. I could do what I could, the best I could within my property. But if I really wanted to make a bigger dent, I either had to move into the corporate ranks, perhaps of a large hotel chain, or I go to the root, which is really education. And I'm a big proponent of strong education, and I thought this is where I have to go. I have to go to the education of hospitality and see what I can do there. And so I started to do research in the field of sustainability some 20 years ago, and putting programs together, courses together, doing some publication, writing books. I wrote the first edition of a book on sustainable hospitality back in 2005, 6, 7. It actually came out in 2009. And yeah, 20 years later, I still write this book. Actually, I had a fourth edition published last summer, with 800 pages. So there's a lot to say about sustainability in hospitality. And this is what I do. I do a lot of research, and I try to bring the classroom across the planet. I think I've been teaching in pretty much all continents, perhaps not all of them, but many.
So you said you shared some information with me, which actually made my jaw drop, which is very difficult to talk about this subject because it can seem a little bit negative at times. You know, we know where we are, we know where we're going, but you said to me, humans have never existed at a time like this when things are, temperatures are getting this high. And so share a little bit more about that and what's actually happening with the environment and everything else.
Yeah, so I follow the climate scientists very closely. I think their work is absolutely outstanding. What they have put out over the last 30 years, in fact, is pretty amazing. And if you look at, I mean, it's basically a matter of measurements. I'm quite pretty pragmatic about this, but if you look at the concentration of carbon, this is what you're referring to really is the concentration of carbon into atmosphere. So we're looking at, parts per million, so parts of CO2 molecules per million parts of air, and we're at 423 parts, probably closer to 424 parts. That is 150% above the levels that was pre-industrial levels. And that concentration of carbon has, the last time that we had such a concentration was about that. It was about anywhere between 2.6 to 5.3 million years ago. There were no humans on this planet. And if we look, I mean, the scientists are very good at this. If you look at the Industrial Revolution, and before that, before the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of carbon was about 280 parts per million. So as I said, we're at 420, and that has been stable. That 280 parts per million has been stable for thousands of years of human civilization since we have actually introduced agriculture and then move on to develop cities and so on. So that's been stable. And basically, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? I mean, it comes down to having different zones on this planet where we can develop ourselves. We can have an agriculture that provides us with a stable food supply that we can then feed cities. It's all linked somehow. And this is what we're disrupting quite heavily right now. And I mean, I think the climate science is clear on that. And those disruption, we think we can adapt, humans can adapt, perhaps we can, but the nature around us has got a hard time. And inside, we're not separated from nature. We are part of nature, and therefore, we will have challenges. And that's perhaps what I meant really by this, is to say we live in it's uncharted path, in fact, where we are right now as a society.
Mm. And it's one of those things, isn't it? We don't know where we're going. We don't actually know, what our future will bring, but we obviously don't want to feel too down and too low about it at the moment, because it's all about making things good. So maybe stuff that we've done all our lives, like being a tourist, going away, it's about how can we do that a bit differently? How can we do that a bit differently that's more sustainable, so that we're still doing those things, but we're doing it in a more sustainable way. So it's almost like I mentioned yesterday, it's a little bit like going on a diet, isn't it? And whenever you go on a diet, it's always about all the foods you have to take away. Whereas actually, no, it should all be about what can we do slightly differently so that we're not going without. So we don't have to give up our holiday. We don't have to give up those things, but we're just doing it slightly differently. So it's not as bad for the environment and everything else and sustainability. So, do you have any thoughts around that and what people can do and how things can change, and maybe even how business owners can think differently about their own business in tourism and eco-accommodation and glamping, camping, luxury outdoor?
Yeah, I do have some. I was just listening to what you were saying, and I thought, yeah, this is kind of interesting, because in fact the saying that it's an unsurmountable catastrophe. This is not helping anyone, in fact, right? So if the message, this is actually one of the barriers. There's great work actually that's been done by a Swedish psychologist, Per Espen Stoknes, and he's actually identified 5 barriers. He calls it the 5 Ds, and there is something like doom or denial and dissonance and things like that. And it's kind of interesting because doom is one of them. To just say, well, it's doomed anyways, and so therefore I'll do nothing about it, right? So this is a barrier to action. or sometimes we see dissonance. This is also a good one way to say, I'm aware that we have to have changes, but we're confused about how to go about it. So I'll take my 4 tons SUVs, drive 50 kilometers to the next organic farmers market, and that makes me feel good. So this is this dissonance that we're often having in our actions, and it's challenging, right? But I think to go over that, there's something to be said about storytelling as well, so to bring when we have a challenge like this, is how do you gather forces to overcome that challenge? And this is, I think, perhaps one of the challenges that we're having, is how to communicate this so that people don't feel it's doom, but rather they feel, listen, there are some entrepreneurs out there and they have solutions and they've implemented it and it works. Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at, how do we get those solutions? How do we scale them? And how do we get people to know about them, etc.? So it's the positive message. But it's hard to cut through this. It's hard to cut through the noise with the positive messages. But there are, of course, out there positive messages.
How can business owners, how can small and large business owners in this industry, in the glamping, unique hospitality, outdoor hospitality industry, what can they do to try to help with this issue, to try to help with this problem, so that it doesn't seem too overwhelming? And as you just mentioned there, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to do nothing. What kind of things can they think through? What kind of things can they do?
So this area, this what you're talking about, the field of glamping, camping, eco lodges, pods, and tree houses, and so on. This entire outdoor hospitality is amazing. Actually, it really is amazing, and I think there's a lot of learning that's transferable to the general hospitality industry. So that's the way around it. Actually, it's this. These guys are trailblazers, as far as I can see, and we've seen this at the conference that we were at not too long ago. I'm often referring back to my class about how the biophilia hypothesis is making a difference. The fact that we have a connection, attraction to everything that's living around us, the plants, the animal, the natural environment, and we see this a lot post-COVID, right? When people were in quarantine, and how attending to plants on your balcony or being in your garden it was so good, really, to just get out of your four walls. So that connection to nature is very strong, and they have that. I mean, that's what outdoor hospitality is they take that and they monetize that in many ways in their offers. And I think this is sort of interesting, especially in this heavily urbanized, technology focused world. I mean, I think this serves a little bit as a reminder of that, how important it is, that connection to nature, really, and making the effort to implement natural elements into our daily lives. And I think that's part of what they do. I'll explain a little bit more in detail if you want to, but we know that outdoor activities is good for us. We know it's when we have studies that show this. And as I said, having plants, designing our home and our workspaces to have natural material around us is good. To have access to green spaces is good. And so the world of outdoor hospitality has got this amazing evolution, and we have a number of urban-based travelers wishing to actually reconnect with nature, and so therefore they prioritize these outdoor experiences during their trips. And I think those innovators that we were talking about, they have something pretty amazing in their hands, because when we talk about camping, glamping, and this luxury outdoor hospitality, you have this unique, sustainable alternatives to the traditional accommodation. And what is it that we have? Well, we have low impact construction, right? A lot of the outdoor facilities that I've seen, some of them have got a temporary or semi-permanent structures that they have in place. Right? When we talk about tents, for example, or cabins, they're really looking at lower environmental impact compared to a traditional built property which sits on ground and de facto seals the ground. So that means you remove the biodiversity forever. Here, we're having those structures are not necessarily, they're often built in line with nature and trying to not disrupt nature so much. So, and I think the attention to eco-friendly materials, less disruptive to natural habitat, this is an amazing part. If we look at, I don't want to go on forever on this, but if we look at the impact, if we just take a hotel, a normal hotel, right, a box hotel, if you look at the impacts throughout the building life cycle, so we're looking at the entire hotel, Sure, every day turn the lights on, turn the aircon on, and you have the kitchens and the spas and the gyms. So you have operational energy, we have operational water, we have operational waste. This is certainly a fairly large impact to manage. But there is this other impact behind that, which is all the material that is needed in the construction of it and all the material that's needed in the upkeep of those properties over its lifetime. And we know that hotels, I mean, they go through refurbishment cycle relatively often, right, to keep up with the demand of consumers and to keep up with the trend. And so therefore, you have material coming into the rooms, material leaving the rooms. You have a waste stream. You have a very much of a linear approach to all of this. And that's difficult to break. It's difficult to break that linear approach, right? New material, new furniture, new beds, new lamps, new everything new. And then after a few years, it's out. Technology is even worse. Technological upgrades are happening at the speed. It's unbelievable. And we have e-waste. So that is challenging. And I think what's interesting with the outdoor accommodation sector is its simplicity. I think it's the inherent simplicity of basically it's the experience, right? It's being out there and it's offering an experience. And the experience, of course, the facilities is part of it. But I think there was a great quote. I would hope to make sure that I say it right here. And it was a quote by one of the attendee at a conference who said, "The true luxury happens outside of building." Right? Building can be a window to the luxury experience, but the true luxury happen outside the building. So, and this is, I think, the philosophy of many of those out there that say low impact building is very important. That's only one aspect. Then we can go on for energy efficiency. We can talk water conservation, waste reduction, food, nature preservation. I mean, the list, I think, is very long of best practices that we see from the outdoor hospitality world, in fact. And I think that's the transferability I'm looking for. I'm really looking for the transferability from this outdoor hospitality world to urban-based properties that are thinking, what do I do? What do I do with biodiversity? How do I cope with this, etc.? Sorry, long answer.
No, I love that. And I love the fact that you've identified those differences between a traditional hotel model and the outdoor luxury accommodation model. And one of the things that we've seen with some of the trailblazers is how they're also, doing really significant upcycling. So they're using materials that already exist, that have already been used, have a lifetime use, and yet they're pulling them out of jungles, like we heard from Bill Bensley, and going to thrift shops and finding these amazing things like sofas, like train carriages, like old caravans, and they are upcycling them, repurposing them, and giving them new life. And as you're saying there, with the materials that are used to build facilities, if we can use materials that have already been produced and have already had a lifetime, you're really reducing the footprint.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Bill Bensley, I think, said it right off the start, because he said, it's a quote from him: "Nature is perfect. We can only make the place worse. Our job is to tread lightly and mitigate the damages." And so, therefore, I think this is a good way to look at it. You're quite right. I mean, upcycling, so that circularity is very important, because, and again, I go back to the traditional hotel. We can look at this amount of, if we just look at emissions like embodied carbon, the amount of emission that goes into producing and manufacturing the furnitures, the fixtures, the equipment, and so on. And if you think about regular refurbishment cycle and the construction of a fixed property, that could be up to 70% of all the emissions of a building. It's not about turning the lights on and off. That is part of it. But a big bulk of the emissions is actually just fitting these places. So if we can have circularity, so if the guys in outdoor hospitality, and we have very luxurious, it's a new form of luxury, of course, if they can do it by looking like Bensley has done, to say, let's have a look at the material that's around us that exists already, and we are going to work with this. We are going to rethink a chair, we're going to reupholster, we're going to work with it, we're going to work with existing material, and that's going to be part of the luxury experience. If they manage to do that, there is no reasons why the rest of the world cannot apply some of this more circularity in the furniture fitting. And for me, it's really about, and you've touched a little bit about this, it's sort of this redefinition of luxury a little bit, isn't it? In a way, that the outdoor hospitality is pushing for in some ways.
I completely agree, because of the fact that, what do we consider, what do we categorize as luxurious? Well, clearly they're Bensley is doing some 5-star, 7-star luxurious properties, but he's actually upcycling old materials from a dump, so to making a toilet. But the toilet is incredibly interesting, and that was one of the other things he was sharing, wasn't it, about how you can make these very ordinary things that we use for everyday ordinary things, and building something really quite spectacular, and it's all recycled, upcycled, old materials, and it seems so 5-star, so luxurious, but it's all totally repurposed material. And I think it's a very, very clever way of doing it, and potentially could actually save some money for the hospitality business, because they're using something that already exists. So you're saying there that the biggest impact is the fixtures and fittings and the furnishings that go on inside these guest accommodation, rather than the build. Is that what you're saying with the hotels? That's
it's not so much well, the FF&E, so furniture, fixtures, and equipment, is a big part. It's not only that. It is also the construction, right? It's the construction phase of a hotel. If you have a green field and you start from scratch and you have foundations and walls and roofing, etc. So that construction phase plus the furniture's fittings, equipment, that we have very few studies on building life cycle assessment in the hotel sector. There are a few studies, and some of the studies point out to something like 50, 60, 70, up to 80%. I've seen a study of the carbon footprint of a 30-year life of a building, a hotel building, coming down to that construction phase plus the furnishing of it and the refurbishment cycle. So the remaining 30% or 40% is the operations that we have, which is the everyday operating the hotels, with everything that belongs to it, such as the lights on and the air con and the laundry and so on. So that's basically what it comes down to. Yeah.
So where do you think people in this industry, which is outdoor hospitality, glamping, luxury resorts, but eco resorts, what do you think they can do the most to help towards this bigger problem that we have as humanity?
I mean, it's a very difficult question, because you come. I mean, the part of the answer is why do we go travel in the first place? Right. I mean, if we want to go to the root, not to say the elephant in the room, but why do we go to travel, and what's our impact throughout the travel? So knowing that we are curious, knowing that people will go travel, no matter what, they might change their destinations, they might change their mode, but they would like to go travel, is what is it that we can do? How do we mitigate? And at this point, we're not even looking at how do we mitigate our impact, but rather how do we ensure a restoration? I mean, how, we talk a lot about regenerative travel and regenerative hospitality in this case. So it's not only about making sure that we maintain the status quo at our destinations, but it's how do we make sure we make the destination even better through our businesses. I mean, that's really the mindset that needs to be put into place. And I think in many ways, this is where the outdoor hospitality is perhaps a little bit, it's ahead in their thinking about that. And I think it comes down to this biophilia and biophilic design and this idea of protection, but it's more than protection. It's really, how do I engage in restoration of natural habitat? How do I ensure some form of restorations? How do I make the guests participate into this? I think this is where they can set the bar relatively high for everyone else. Because let's face it, in terms of things such as energy efficiency, sure, many of the properties are energy efficient, but energy efficiency is a topic that's come across the industry at wide. I mean, I know some urban properties that are zero energy, etc. So they are very efficient and they use a lot of renewable energy, etc. So I think we've gone a long way already on that topic. I think what really is where we're trying to make a difference is how do we make the place a better place, and that will be working together with nature and having restoration plans. So and we know some companies are involved in coral reef restoration because it's also natural barriers to floods, or mangrove restorations, or I mean, it could be many things really that you are involved in, and that's that. And at the end, it always comes back to this. It always comes back to we monetize this beauty, right? I mean, at the end, the customers, of course, they come and stay at our places, but they also come because of this magnificent nature and so on. And so we readily monetize nature, our industry does. And now is about time to say not only do we monetize, but we reinvest. And that is the restoration work. And I think this is where the outdoor hospitality is maybe cutting edge, at least more. I hope. I still have to work more case studies and talk to more people, but I think in the thinking, they're definitely there.
So, do you think that this movement of the outdoor hospitality world, do you think it has this bigger potential to influence the bigger industry as hotels as we know it, and all those kinds of big businesses that have been operating in their own way for so long? Do you think it's something that could be a best practice that could come out of
But
this movement?
yeah, you know what? I think so. And that's part of why I'm quite keen myself to write up case studies and to publish, to publish them and to pass them around. Because ultimately, those best practices can be implemented by big chains, big corporate. And what the big corporates have that the small guys don't have is this ability to scale. And if a best practice is taken from the outdoor hospitality and implemented by one of those large corporations, and we're talking about scaling up to not 100 but thousands of properties, this is then the scale of impact that is that we're looking for as well. So I do think that there is, and in fact, not only do I think there is, but it's happened in the past already. The large companies have adopted best practices from smaller companies that were more cutting edge, more agile, perhaps in their practices. And then large companies have come around and they've either copied the practice and scale it, or they've simply bought over the small company in its own and then implemented some. So I think we're going to see this. We're going to see some of those practices. And I think some of the practices that we're going to see is going to be in the field of restoration, regeneration work. This is where some of the large companies are thinking, how do I go about this? What do I do? And I think this is where the outdoor hospitality may be able to do the trailblazing, basically.
So, in other words, what you're saying there is, so for the smaller business who may have introduced a really sustainable best practice idea and it's working really well, and they've done it because in their heart they want to do that. It means a lot to them. It's their vision, it's their ethos, it's how they see they want to run their business. But they may just be saying, well, this is what I'm doing, but it's not having the bigger, wider impact. But actually, it could be having a bigger, wider impact, because if it's shown as best practice and the bigger companies pick it up and start doing similarly, then that's going to be a multiple thing that continues to spread. And so that's great.
It's huge. It's huge. And let's face it, in the world of sustainable hospitality, all the corporates that I know, this is one area where collaboration and cooperation in one form or another is very strong. I mean, while those companies really, they're competing against each other on the market for the overnight stays, when it comes to sustainability, there is this amazing willingness to share. How do we move this forward? What do we learn from each other? And so therefore, it's not only learning with each other as large companies, but it's what do we learn from the smaller players that are more cutting edge? And I mean, this is, talking about the positives around this. This is it. I mean, this is this willingness to learn from each other and to share those best practices. And so it's, yeah, you do make a difference. Even if it's your own small hotel, your small property, your small lodge, and you're thinking, okay, well, this is what I do. I mean, I try to mitigate my small impact. Or ultimately, if those best practices are picked up, and they will be probably, and then rolled out to hundreds and thousands of properties, I mean, this is where we see an entire industry moving forward. And this is very important, of course.
Absolutely. One thing I want to touch on, because I don't want to turn from a very lovely positive to a slight negative, but what do you think about greenwashing? Do you think that we have a lot of it starting to come along, or do you think people are truly trying to make a difference? What's your view on greenwashing?
Well, we have no, we do have greenwashing in our industry. I think we definitely do. With some of it is intentional, some of it is unintentional, unfortunately. There's some greenwashing that happens simply because you're thinking you want to do the good thing, but in fact, by using the wrong set of words, by not having looked at how words are defined. And I mean, we see a lot of that around net zero and carbon neutral and not net positive and nature positive, etc. So we have to be careful about how those words are being implemented and used. If these words are not well defined, you should just keep your fingers away from it because it's not helping the situation, in fact. So there is some intentional and unintentional, and there is some greenwashing in our industry. There is no doubt about it. I think this is why the lawmakers, especially here in the EU with the new EU Green Claim Directive, they're really trying to tackle this down. I mean, trying to rein in the certification and trying to, if you use any words, whether it's to say I have local food or I have an environmentally friendly hotel stay, then you have to substantiate those claims with proofs. And I think this is a reaction, basically, a reaction of the fact that we've abused the system. I mean, as an industry, but we're not the only one. I mean, every single other industry has done the same. If you look at the food sector, oh my God. So, and so, yes, it's happening. And the bigger problem with this that I see is it's hurting those that are truly involved in their sustainability. They suffer from the fact that others do greenwash because they have done the work and they are out there and the message is out there, but there is then this sense from the consumer that we're not too sure. We're not too sure if what they say is right. Whereas perhaps, they have been doing it all the way along and they're very serious about it. But just because there's a sense that maybe they're greenwashing. So, I think this is what we're seeing in terms of regulations coming down the pipeline is a reaction of the fact that there's been some greenwashing and some abuse, and we're going to have to live with it. That's it. And to substantiate your claim, I think it's fair enough. If you say something, you should be able to prove it and live up to it.
I couldn't agree more. There was a very interesting piece of research that was done by the UK government during the pandemic. When everything stopped, we went into lockdowns, and then there was this feeling of unease from companies and businesses about, okay, when can I start selling? When can I start opening up to the consumer and say, okay, we're back to business again? So they did some research with the consumer to say, okay, when would you be happy and who would you like to contact you about this kind of thing? And essentially, many people, in fact, the majority were saying, I'm okay with that, but as long as they're a company that have good in their heart and they have other ideas of sustainability projects, environmental projects, and just basically being good to the community. So they have a bigger picture rather than just making money and making a profit. And it was really quite significant how many people said that. And okay, we've got back to life as normal, but it doesn't escape my notice that there must be this underlying theme amongst consumers that they actually do want business to do good business and to do business that is supportive to the environment and everything else. So that was really, I found that quite heartening and quite optimistic. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, this is what you're talking about. This is fantastic. We talk about in class about this. I mean, this famous stakeholder theory rather than shareholder. The emphasis on ensuring that the value of a business is spread amongst the stakeholders rather than just the shareholders. And I think this is something that's the expectations of society has gone that route for sure. And COVID has probably just made that even more. And so, yes, I agree. For us, when you think about the hospital, I always ask, we always talk about this in class. The basic question that we ask ourselves at the beginning of a class is, how do we plan, develop, and manage a hotel sector or hospitality sector, which is kind and regenerative to the environment? It's healthy to the workers, pleasing to the guests, engaging in a community, efficient to the operators, profitable to the owners. I mean, you make the list of stakeholders because this is what it is, really. We don't operate in bubbles. We operate with partners. And we've always said that, the true value of a business is to be able to find solutions to problems. This is how you make your money. It's not about making money on the problem themselves. It's not by making things worse. which some companies believe that that's what it is, by making things worse, this is how I make my money, and this is the best way to go at it. No, making the money is about creative invention, creative solutions to problems that we have in society, whether it's environmental problems, social problems, etc. And everybody wins from this in the long term. So yeah, I agree, and it is kind of good news to see that that's what people really expect from their businesses, and I think this is what people expect from their hotels, in the way that they treat their employees, and from in the way that they interact in the communities, and how much they pay their suppliers, etc. I mean, the list is long, really. But yes.
I just hope that consumers continue to vote with their feet in the direction towards those businesses that have a bigger heart and a bigger mind than just profit and making money out of the guest.
This is the difficult part, isn't it? I mean, it is the difficult part. Every single one of us have got a tremendous power, because it's the power of our wallet. We, all of us, everyone works hard for their money, and so you have a choice where to spend it, especially in hospitality, which is so heterogeneous and eclectic. You can actually decide where you spend. It's not like you have only one provider. And so it's about making the right decision. And to make the right decision, you need that transparent information. You need to make sure there isn't greenwashing. You need to be able to trust. All of that is very important. And there are multiple players you have to rely on. I mean, you might have to rely on OTAs. You might have to rely on the hotel website themselves, on what they tell you, etc. So yes, very important.
Mm. So, what are you most optimistic about in terms of this topic and where things are moving into the future?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I am optimistic on the fact that we have a few global agreements, even though it's very hard to move forward. But we do have some global agreements. We have a global biodiversity framework since December 2022, and it's a good move forward. We have 23 targets to reach by 2030 and 2050. This sets the stage. We do have sustainable development goals, 17 of them, 169 targets. This set the stage. It's about the implementation. Many properties, many hotels are doing that. And so this is good. I'm keeping within our industry bubble for a minute here. So we do have global frameworks, and it's about the implementation of it. And we see this happening. Some companies are implementing, and they are measuring, and they are tracking, and they are setting targets that are in line with those agreements. And that's very, very really positive. So biodiversity for me is a big topic. We tend to have a little bit of a carbon tunnel vision. It's important to deal with carbon, no doubt about it, but it's not the only thing. This is the same medal, two sides, and they're really connected, biodiversity and climate in many ways. So we tend to have a little bit of a not in outdoor hospitality. This is what perhaps makes the difference between the rest of the hospitality world. Is outdoor hospitality, I think, understands really well that connection of their impact on biodiversity and climate. The corporate world, although they are making progress on biodiversity, there's a lot of going on more on the carbon. So there tends to be a focus on carbon more than anything else. So anyways, the positive stories are that we have frameworks in place, and it's a matter of implementation. We have KPIs in place. We know more and more. We know how to measure better. Not everything, but we're getting better. The granularity of the data is there. Technology helps to do that. So that's all the positive. The but I do have some worries as well. I mean, I do have some worries, and it's partly our industry, because it's to handle the masses of people that wish to travel, and we talk about outdoor hospitality. This remains for a certain type of clientele. It's not the mass tourist, and not to say that one is better than the other. We have to manage mass tourism just like we have to manage the rest of it, and we have to be as active in the different fields. And there are people that wish to travel a certain way, others a different way. But this is what I said: people are curious and they're going to travel. So it's much about, we're still much about mitigating the impacts and how to do this better. And post-COVID, we said during COVID, oh wow, it's amazing, those places that are not run over by tourists, and finally we see blue skies and so on. And now we look at those places, and of course there are a lot of tourists again. I mean, we're back to the same mode of operations, basically. So it's those areas. I'm not worried so much about outdoor hospitality. I still think that we need to keep check and we need to keep looking at what they're doing, etc. And I'm looking forward to the transferability of those practices to other areas of hospitality. But there are other areas of hospitality which I think needs more attention and more work. So I'm interested in outdoor hospitality, but I'm looking at what other parts can learn from it.
Absolutely, and the best practice that can be shared that maybe could be duplicated amongst the bigger corporate world. So if somebody has been implementing something that they consider to be best practice, it's worked very well, it's very sustainable, and it's something that they're very proud of, is that something that they could share with you? Would you like to hear from them?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a few things that I do. I mean, I run a panel on Hospitality Net. It's a news platform for hospitality, and I run a panel. This is just on a voluntary basis, but the base of the panel is to have experts interacting on different topics. It's also a fairly good way to share best practices among each other and across the wider audience. So that's one way. And best practice. I'm always on the lookout for best practices. Well, I'm not the only one. I think there are many people. There are networks of hotels that are looking for best practices. And so therefore, if anyone is interested, yes, they should just reach out. And I will definitely also make sure that others know about those practices and to make sure that those are shared across the planet.
I think that's a great way of doing it. So how best should people contact you? Is that to your LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is great. So this is an easy platform to reach out. Email, I think on my university platform, my email is listed anyways. And email is always good. It's a bit traditional, it's a bit old-fashioned, but it works. So that's great. But just as a side note, I'm actually for the first time, I think in more than 15 years, I will be off the grid for a little bit of time because I'm going cycling from the Atlantic coast to the Black Sea with my brother. And so therefore, I'm not planning on doing any writing. This is going to be the first for me in many, many years. So I'm planning to be really off grid and just enjoy the cycling.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure that I'll include all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, Professor Dr. Willy Legrand. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you originally in Montenegro, but now again, it's been a wonderful chat. And I'm so pleased that you are feeling very positive about the industry that I work within, and the people who work within it work very, very hard, and they do work from their heart and their soul on projects that they hope will benefit their community and also the environment. So if they can share that in any way at all, then that's perfect. And I am very, very grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Have a great day.
Whether you're looking to build a website for your business, your hobby, your podcast, or just for fun, Pair Networks is your go-to web hosting partner. Not only do we have the lowest domain price in the industry, starting at just $11, we've got hundreds of stunning website templates to help you stand out from the crowd. You're not a techie? Not a problem. With our easy DIY site builders, you can launch your impressive website without any technical know-how. And when it comes to security and updates, don't worry, we've got you covered. Our 24/7 US-based customer support is the best in the industry. Check out pair.com today to learn more. PAIR.com.